further debate. I recognize a member from Nipissing.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to join in this conversation for the next 5 or 6 minutes. I have to say, Speaker, if I were to jump to the end of the story, it would be to reiterate the story we heard from a couple of the greenhouse operators in your own area when we toured there together. Speaker, the greenhouse operators talked about the fact that they needed to double the size of their operations. And, you know, you wonder, what does that mean in terms? These are massive greenhouses that grow fruits and vegetables all year long. And we met up with them, but they couldn't get a good power deal from the province of Ontario. A couple years later, we met up with them at the vegetable growers lobby day here at Queen's Park, and I asked one of them, you know, last time we saw each other a couple years ago, you talked about the fact that you were going to double the size of your greenhouse. Did you ever do it? And of course the answer was, well, yes, I did. In fact, we spent $100 million. So that now we know the scope of what they were talking about. We spent $100 million doubling the size of our greenhouse, but we did it in Ohio. Wow. Now that is just fascinating, Speaker, that they could not get power at a price they can afford in Ontario, so they go to do it in Ohio, where, think about it, Speaker, as we now know from the Auditor General, we pay Ohio to take our surplus power, and they come and eat our lunch and steal our manufacturers. That's the bizarre side of all this, Speaker. So I was reading Niagara this week. Well done. I was reading Niagara this week, and I had to chuckle at the last couple of sentences. It was the Energy Minister bragging about how great the job he's done here in Ontario, and he says, by investing billions into modernizing its system, Ontario has now an energy system that's reliable and clean. This is what our minister said. He said, we're the jurisdiction that led the way, said Thibault. Everybody else is trying to figure out how to do it. Well, we've already done it. Well, Speaker, I had to chuckle because I know the Premier and this minister said they spent $35 billion. One of them said $35, the other said $50. They can't agree on how much they spent on modernizing the system. So let me tell you what they actually spent that money on. I'll call Chapter 1 frills and shiny baubles. They spent $2 billion on smart meters that we know don't work. They spent $1.2 billion on a smart grid. They spent $600 million on the coal plant write-off. That's before they got back into coal now in the States. Yeah, they bought one in $2.5 billion on conservation and $1.1 billion on cancelling the gas plants. So that's about $7.4 billion of the money that they said was to build up their system. That's so far, none of that has done anything to build up the system, and we're only at $7 billion now. Then we call it unreliable and intermittent power. So they spent $10.2 billion on wind generation, $5.2 billion on solar generation, and $5 billion for transmission to get power connections for those far-flung wind and solar projects to bring the power to where it's needed. So when the minister says we spent billions modernizing the hydro system. So far, Speaker, none of this has modernized it. They say they upgraded the transmission system, but it's kind of a stretch goal, Speaker. They did spend money on transition, but not to build a system. This was to bring power from the power lines at the wind and solar projects that are far-flung. So that was $20.4 billion. Together, that's almost $28 billion so far. Then, of course, we have the other photo-op generation. That's another $4 billion. And a good value for money was the Bruce nuclear refurbishment of $3.4 billion. So, Speaker, this proves that the bulk of the money did not go towards what they say, quote, the cost of the rebuild. It went to intermittent and unreliable wind and solar projects, just like the Auditor General, who they continue to disparage, tells us they did, and they're unable to deliver generation when the wind isn't blowing and the sun's not shining. Now, I heard the new parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Energy speak. Now, here's a couple of facts that probably she should look at, and a couple of websites she can go to, because I've discussed the reliability system for many times before. I want you to go to, it's called Blackout Tracker Annual Report, a very important international system that tells you. And Blackout Tracker Annual Report revealed the number of Ontario outages increased by 275% from just 2012 to 2015. Wow. That's the time they told us they were fixing this broken system that they keep saying. And in the Auditor General's 2015 annual report, she revealed, quote, most of the increases in what consumers pay for electricity has come from generation cost, which account for 60%. Generation cost increased 74%. So again, it's not to rebuild this system, Speaker, that they keep saying. It's to put into their pet projects and their ideological projects. So what happens, Speaker? As a direct result now of having amongst the highest all-in electricity rates in North America, we have we not only have lost businesses in Ontario, Speaker, two very prominent businesses have not come to Ontario. Google announced their first ever Canadian data centre, heavy users of electricity. They went to the province of Quebec, and Google cited they went to Quebec because Ontario has the highest rates. And I end with Amazon. I'm not talking about their new headquarters, Speaker, but Amazon opened their first ever data centre in Canada. Where? Province of Quebec, citing the highest energy rates in Ontario.
Shame. Thank you very much.